right here at the Daryl King team, right on Yonge Street, sharing the mindsets with my very special guest, Bita Di Lisi, who's been on the program before, and her husband was here last time. So I want to give her a big applause. Woo!
Thank you for having me.
So excited. Listen, I love when you and Robert both come here.
Thank
right?
you.
One or the other, but last time she had a sore throat or something.
I had a fever.
You had a fever, and Robert took over. He did an admirable job. So she promised me she's going to knock the socks out of it, Robert, so be careful. So anyway, I was just asking them who had seen you before and who didn't. So as far as I'm concerned, she's the best paralegal for this type of work. These guys are amazing. So Bita Di Lisi is a distinguished licensed paralegal in good standing with the Law Society. Good standing, bringing over 2 decades of experience in real estate, property management, and landlord and tenant law. She is a trusted advocate for real estate professionals, landlords, and investors navigating complex tenancy matters. Bita is the co-founder of Stonegate Legal Services Professional Corporation, where she leads a team of 8 experienced paralegals. With her husband, Robert, who's been in here a few times, who regularly represents clients before the board. Together, they provide strategic, efficient, and results-driven legal support to realtors, landlords, and investors across Ontario. The team offers multilingual services: Farsi, Armenian, English, Turkish, Spanish, and Italian. You're getting like this. We've got 32 languages, right? So ensuring clients feel understood and supported through the legal process. Bita continues to be a leading voice in landlord and tenant representation, bridging the gap between legal knowledge and world application. So I'm happy, as I said, to have her here today. And let's have it fun and interesting for everybody. You want to say hello?
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for having me.
Right. So I'll throw this off the record. Bita lost some weight, and she looks amazing.
Thank you.
You look 10 years younger.
Thank you.
Right?
Thank you.
I got to do the same thing. Right? So I got some questions, so if you guys want to take notes and after take some questions. She has to leave at 2:15, so the questions will be a little shorter, so be ready to go. So what happens when a buyer expects vacant possession, but the tenant refuses? This is probably one of the #1 things on the hit list, where the tenant refuses to leave. I sold the property, I sold to you, and now the tenant says, yeah, we're leaving, but come the closing date, they're not leaving.
Or they don't say anything, or they don't leave. And they don't have to leave. So what everybody involved needs to know is that tenants have the right to remain in the property until an application is brought forward in front of the board. The board determines whether or not the buyer has a genuine intent to occupy, and then the board will determine whether or not the tenancy comes to an end.
So let me ask you, so I'm on month to month as a tenant. I had closing, say, April 1st, and I wanted vacant possession April 2nd. What's happening?
Well, when a property is sold, you have the right to remain until the board ends the tenancy. What a lot of agents are doing is telling their buyers that when you buy the property, the tenant has to leave. We're going to ask for vacant possession. Even if they ask for vacant possession in the agreement of purchase and sale,
Which they all do,
delivery or performance of that agreement of purchase and sale in providing vacant possession becomes extremely difficult. So that means that if the tenant doesn't willfully agree to leave so that the seller can provide vacant possession, you now have to go through the legal channels to evict. Remember, the sale of a property is not relevant to the tenancy. So just because you've sold the property for $20 million, just because the buyer is homeless and living out of their car, does not mean that the board will end the tenancy. Those two things are separate. The sale of the property is not relevant to the tenancy. If the buyer cannot persuade the board that they have a genuine intent to occupy, the board will not end the tenancy, which becomes very scary.
So in a situation, so I'm normally the listing agent, and I've got tons of properties with tenants. So the tenants have promised us they're moving out, and they've even signed off to the fact that they're moving out. What more can we do at that stage?
Well, that depends what they sign. So there's two legal notices. There's the N9, tenant's notice, and the N11, the mutual agreement to end the tenancy. Whichever notice is signed must be filed with the board. Okay, it's filed with the board because the board will then issue an eviction order without a hearing. That is your enforcement. But what a lot of agents don't understand is that they have to file that notice with the board, because without a backing of an order, that notice is
null and void.
You got it. It's as good as toilet paper.
I'll tell you this, this from my own experience of having my own team and watching others, that I would almost guarantee no one files that with the board.
90% of the time they don't, because they don't know.
Right.
They think just a notice is just a notice. They'll leave.
So we can close up this now, because I've learned enough that we don't need to learn any more. So an N9 and an N11 have to be signed by the tenant and by the landlord, and needs to be processed to the board. Now, what's the board? Tell them what the board is.
The Landlord and Tenant Board. The Landlord and Tenant Board resolves disputes between landlords and tenants. They are the court-like setting where parties can turn to file applications when they're not meeting eye to eye. And the adjudicator, which is the deciding member, they're not judges. They often don't have a legal background. They make decisions on matters. So that's the board.
That's scary.
It is scary. It is scary.
Guys, it is scary, I hate to tell you.
Yeah.
Because, listen, if I'm moving into a house, and one of you guys are out there as a tenant, I have nothing against you, but I want to move into the house. I need a place to live. So does the deal fall apart then automatically?
It can.
Right? It should.
It can. Well, it either falls apart, they agree to extend the closing with a penalty, of course.
We've had to do that.
Yeah. Or the buyer pulls out, and when they pull out, the tenant can continue their tenancy. You're back at square one. So here we are.
That's why, guys, I listen, I've worked with Bita and Robert in the past, and that's why I swear by them. I can do my own thing, but they're experts in what they do, and they can do a better job than I can do. So if they can do a better job than me, I call them up and say, here, look after it. I get the landlord, call them, let's work through this, right? Because you shouldn't do what you don't know, because you're not going to get a good result. So always turn to the experts that know how to maneuver. So here's another question. How the Residential Tenancies Act, RTA, governs possession?
So remember, the act, there's nowhere in the act that says a tenant must vacate when a property is sold. Doesn't exist. In the Ontario Standard Lease, Form 400, nothing in those two forms that says the same. Even if you go out tomorrow and add a Schedule A to your Ontario Standard Lease or Form 400 that says something along the lines of the tenant agrees to vacate when a property is sold, that clause becomes void and unenforceable. Because what the law says, what the Residential Tenancies Act says, is that only the board has the ultimate authority to issue an order ending the tenancy. That means if a property is sold and a buyer has a genuine intent to occupy, a notice must be served for personal use. You must meet the requirements of that notice. Then you have to file an application with the Landlord and Tenant Board. Then you have to do a Hail Mary, hopefully.
You ever see that movie, Hail Mary? You guys want to see a great movie? Hail Mary. I'll tell you, he should win an Oscar. He was amazing.
Then you have to do a Hail Mary, and hopefully your matter is heard. And again, I say hopefully because there's no guarantees at the Landlord and Tenant Board.
So here's the question. From 50-50, how does it swing?
I can't give a percentage.
There's no percentage?
Because I'll tell you why. And anyone who gives you a percentage, you need to question. Each tenancy matter is different.
I got that.
And each member is different. There's no guideline as to how a board decides. Right? So how do you feel in the morning?
If they like you, they might do it. And if they don't like you, they may not do it.
Not only that, hopefully.
Who boards the board?
Hopefully you had your coffee in the morning. Hopefully your wife was nice to you in the morning. Hopefully the matter before yours was a good matter and you're not all peed up or upset. because you'll usually take it out on the next matter. So when I say you don't know what will happen at the board, you really don't know.
That's pretty sad when you have a professional, and they've done with thousands of cases, I'm sure, right? So guys, if you have tenants in there, like, you really need to work to try and get them. Like me, I tell my sellers, we need to get these tenants out of here before we go to market, because otherwise we may have a problem closing. And if you have an investor that, and if they're a good tenant, they may willing one. I have one up here, I won't give you the address, but I just have one up at Young and Elgin Mills right now. The tenant right now is amazing, and I told my landlords that, but when I sell it, it's going to be the same type of person, right? So I should get an N9 or an N11 signed now.
Well, remember, an N11 is an agreement to end the tenancy. So what if they don't agree? Well, what if they say, you know what, Daryl, what if the buyer wants to take me on? I'm a good tenant. Why don't you find a buyer who can take me on? And you know and I know that finding a buyer who wants to keep a tenant on is like finding a needle in a haystack.
Unless it's an investment property, like a little
Exactly.
condo or something like that.
Exactly.
And they want it as investment property, that's about it. So, well, I mean, my wife, so I have a tenant now, he's great cooperating, and he's on month to month.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I'll get out, or I'll stay.
Drum roll. Cash for keys.
Yeah?
Cash for keys. I mean, cash for keys, let me tell you what it is first. Cash for keys is a legal and mutual agreement to end the tenancy. It's not extortion, because you don't have to do cash for keys, right? Cash for keys is an offering. You're dangling a carrot to the tenant in order to get them to come to the table to agree to something. It could be 5,000, could be 10,000, could be 50,000, whatever, something.
And you guys are going like this, but I'll tell you, we both know there's been ones that in the $100,000 range, right? So them tenants can be real like this. They're experts at what they do. They know the law better than we do sometimes, because that's what they do, extortion, right?
No, I said it's not extortion.
But I say in a different sense, it is extortion from the tenant to the landlord, because they're paying $2,000 or $3,000, but they want a big amount like that to get out, and they always said, yeah, we'll leave, right? They're on month to month, whatever the case might be.
Remember, you have two options. You either go through the board and have them solve your problem, or you do cash for keys and you solve your problem. But if you go to the board, you have no influence on the outcome. They do. If you do cash for keys, you have some influence. You're not going to get 100%. It doesn't even work that way when you're negotiating an offer on a property. You may get 70%, right? But 70% influence is still better than no influence. So you have to give $10,000 to $15,000. So what? You write it off, right? You get the tenant out.
If we can get under 10 or 15,000.
If you can, which is often the enticing amount right now. And then you can do whatever you want. You can list the property with vacant possession. You can hold an in-person open house. You can stage the property. You can give it some landscaping. You're not going to have any issues or restricted showing times, right? You're going to avoid all of that.
I always try and get vacant possession before I put it for sale, right? So, why buyer beware is a critical warning? This is tenanted property and transactions. Well, buyer beware is right?
Yeah, buyers have to know, because many buyer agents are saying, Daryl, when you buy this property, and you can do whatever you want. And it's not the case, because you're restricted to what the law allows you to do. And if you take it over, you assume the tenant, you can't increase the rent. What you're really doing is stepping into the shoes of the seller landlord to continue the tenancy.
So guys, if you are looking at tenanted property, I hope you're paying attention to this. Because you know what the listing agent's going to say? No problem, we'll get you vacant possession, right? I'm going to tell you, 90% of them agents are going to tell you, we can get you vacant possession. You know what we just heard? Bullshit, right? Let's be frank, it's bullshit. Because she's the expert in the industry, and she's not even guaranteed. I bet on her more than I'll bet on me, but I'll bet on her, then me, and then ahead of all of you guys. But the difference is, you really need to start working with that tenant right at the very beginning, actually before you go to market, right? That's really...
Yeah, but when you say you, what do you mean you?
Point at you, right?
Okay.
But really, the owner of the property really, it's what I would say is, needs to get an N9 or an N11 signed before they hit the market.
Yes, but
no questions.
No questions, but, and I agree with that. What I don't agree with is the agent going to talk to the tenant. And the reason why is because when things go sour, everybody points the finger at who? The agent. Right? It's the agent's fault. And I didn't know, so ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Just because you didn't know, it's not an excuse.
Not at all.
And remember, agents, there's always an imbalance of power because agents hold a professional license. Agents have access to industry professionals like us. So when they're going outside of their scope of work to talk to the tenant, to get them to sign a legal document like an N11, like an N9, and if the tenant doesn't leave, you're gonna have a huge problem. I just wanted to define you.
You, right? So, listen, I always say we go that extra mile so we can do what we can do. But don't, like when I have a property, I always go and meet the tenant or talk to them to try and have cooperation with them for showings and whatnot. And I always want to find out what's their thoughts when we sell it. Are you willing to move out, or if they want to stay, are you willing to stay? So I find out right up front where they stand. But just because they said so,
no, that's
doesn't get me anywhere.
Oh no, not at all. It gets
Right.
you a lawsuit.
Right?
Yeah, because anyone can change their mind. I've had agents call me on the day of closing, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, saying, my client's lawyer called and said that the tenant is not leaving. And they changed their mind. And an N11 was signed or an N9 was provided.
Well, they were provided.
Yeah.
So they did the right thing.
They did the right things, but if they don't leave, and if that notice is not, if that agreement or notice is not filed, there's no backing.
So if it was filed, would they have a better chance?
Well, it's not that they have a better chance. They have an order. They're now going to take that order to the sheriff's office, book a date and time for an eviction.
And how long does that take?
3 to 6 weeks. But at least you know there's an end, right? At least you know when you file with the sheriff, there's an end.
Guys, did you hear that comment? So closing is today, but now the tenants and the other moving out. We just had one on the condo I just sold on Birchmount. The tenant, I made sure they got out beforehand. I had the landlord work with them and do everything. Everything was signed and everything like that. And they moved out. But, you know, if they didn't move out, chances are it doesn't close. And then it could take 3 to 6 weeks to get in front of the sheriff, even if it was signed the N9 or N11, right? So where does that leave you? I'll tell you what, if you're the listing agent, you're pretty much, unless they got a really good deal and they really want that property, they're probably not going to wait. Like, I don't see many buyers waiting 3 to 6 weeks to find out, no, the tenant can still stay.
I had a client list.
But I can see an awful lawsuit
huge
against the listing agent and the seller, right? Because what would you do if you're a buyer agent? You're going to sue the listing broker and you're going to sue the seller.
I sue everyone.
Right?
I had a client that relisted a condominium for $120,000 below market because the tenant refused to vacate. The tenant refused to take a $50,000 cash for keys offer. Insane.
And it's still there?
Well, the property's sold now.
But are they still there?
But they're still there. We're actually waiting for a hearing for the buyer, the new purchaser's own use. Yeah. But I mean, $120,000 below market value, if someone's going to buy this and acquire this headache, Is it worth it? Maybe.
So I have a couple clients that have tenants in there, and they have very low rates. Unfortunately, they don't want to move, and you know, because their rent is so cheap that they don't want to move. So we can't sell it. You know, we tried to, you know, do a little cash thing, but they like where they're at.
And they like their rent.
They love their rent.
Of
The rent
course.
is
Way below market
the rent
value.
is way below market
There you
value.
go.
So they're you know, their contract or their lease is long gone. They're month to month, right? So what's the take on this month to month type of thing, right? Like how do you get them out even though they were expired December 31st and now it's April 1st. They're on month to month. I've sold the property. Now, what if I want to move back into the property?
Then you have to file and proceed through the board. You have to serve the notice, fulfill the requirements of that notice, file an application.
Even me.
Even you. I mean, you are Daryl King, but
I don't mean it that way. I'm just talking about being the owner of the property. Because I want to get the freaking tenant out of there, right?
in that case, you have to go through the board.
So, you know, that's why I got rid of a lot of, well, pretty much all of them. Just because of these cases, right? Because it's almost impossible to get the tenants out of there. But you need tenants to pay the rent, to pay the mortgage, to pay the taxes. So you're gonna catch 22,
It's a double-edged sword.
right?
Yeah.
And that's what, you know, so really, wow. So how important is proper documentation as such as lease agreements and notice and avoiding disputes after closing?
Oh boy. Okay, so I'm gonna rewind a little bit, okay? Because before the tenant moves into the property, the landlord has the right to ask for certain documentation, so that when things go sour, we can ask for that from the landlord in order to commence a legal proceeding. What are you gonna ask for? You need a letter of employment because you wanna know that there's employed earnings, such that if we have to garnish later on, we know that the tenant is employed. If a tenant is on Ontario Works, Disability, or Welfare, you can't touch those funds. So if they don't pay and you're owed $20,000, okay, well, Daryl, you now have an order that the tenant owes you $20,000. You can evict that tenant, but how are you ever going to recover those monies? So if you ask for proper documentation before...
Who should we ask, the buyer agent?
The buyer agent, yes, or the listing agent should be asking for the buyer agent should be asking for the listing agent to provide those in their agreement of purchase and sale. You always want a copy of the lease. So if something exists in writing, you want a copy. So always ask for the lease. The second thing you want to ask for is a tenant acknowledgement, because in the absence of a lease, let's say there was a fire or a flood and the lease got destroyed. A tenant acknowledgement is an acknowledgement of the tenancy terms as of today from the tenant. What's the rent as of today? Who are the tenants as of today? What is the parking arrangement, the locker arrangement? Who pays for utilities? What is being rented? All that information that would be in a lease agreement is coming from the tenant.
The tenant's going to provide that?
The tenant often provides it.
They do?
Now.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
How?
Well, I'll tell you where to get a tenant acknowledgement from, and I'll send it over to you so you can share it with everybody.
Okay.
Before listing a property on the market, usually everybody is on good terms before the property is listed. So I would ask that the listing agent or the seller landlord ask the tenant to complete a tenant acknowledgement that you can attach it to the agreement of purchase and sale as a Schedule B or Schedule C. This way you have that documentation prior to the offer being submitted. I find that usually tenants don't resist completing a tenant acknowledgement form.
Well, so let's say the tenant's been there for arguably for 2 years. So when let's say they're renting it out for $2,500 a month, they're going to pay for utilities, the cable they got to pay on their own, right? Parking is included. So, and they were making say $50,000 or $60,000 at that time. Now it's 2 years later, I don't have a job. I'm not making any money, I'm on unemployment. And, you know, everything else is, everything else has gone up a little bit. And even they should have had the 3.25 or what it is for the increase. So what happens at that stage?
Have you ever seen a plane crash?
Me personally, only on TV.
Okay. So it's almost like watching a plane crash, and we joke about it, but the reason I use that analogy is because they've gone backwards. They lost their job, they're on disability, they can't afford anything. So what usually happens in these cases is that they stop paying the rent. They know that it's going to take a whole system, a broken system, to get them out. They know that time is on their side. And they know on top of that, even if they get evicted, how are you going to get blood from a stone? How are you going to go after these monies, right? The guy doesn't have any money. That's why he got evicted. Probably why he's renting. So this is what happens when you don't properly pre-qualify or when circumstances change. We've had tenants who are professionals, who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are realtors, brokers, broker of records.
Realtors are not so good right now.
Well, yes, they're not so good right now. But we've had these people be evicted. We've had to go after them to garnish their wages. It doesn't matter how much they make. If circumstances change and they can't pay, they can't pay.
But you're no sooner getting them out because now they've
Right.
got less to chase after, right? So
What you're doing is you're hoping that they'll become employed again so that you can enforce your order and get some monies.
So if they become unemployed and they're unemployed, because you said if on disability, but this is unemployed, is that the same thing?
Well, if they're getting unemployment insurance,
Yes.
you can't garnish these benefits. There are certain benefits that you can't touch. Disability, Ontario Works, pension, alimony, child support.
Alimony? A lot of divorcees out there, right?
Right.
You know. So really, the landlord is at the mercy of the tenant pretty much all the time, unfortunately. That's why the investors don't want to buy, just because of that, right? Because they changed the law so far towards the tenants. As landlords, they're investing hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and they're on the shit on the stick half the time, right?
Can I explain that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the law. In my opinion, right, because you shared your opinion, in my opinion, the law provides a balance for both sides, okay? And I say this because the law will never say, hey, Daryl, don't pay your rent. Or, hey, landlord, don't repair a leaky roof. The law will never say that. You won't find that in the
Well, I
act,
hope not.
right? What the law says is that tenant, you have to pay your rent even in the absence of a maintenance or repair issue. The law says, landlord, you must maintain a property even in the absence of rent. But here's the problem. It's not the law that is the issue. The problem is, if you have a problem with a tenant, you have to serve a notice, fulfill the requirements, file an application, wait to go through the landlord and tenant board, advocate your position at the board. Hopefully the board will side with you. You have to go through a system. The problem is not the law. The problem is that this system that you have to go through is a broken system. And landlords fall victim to this broken system. So we need to fix the system. The law is there. It's the system. And when there are too many moving parts, you can't control all of that. If the board was only 1 or 2 or 5 adjudicators, you can control what each person does. But there are tens of thousands of landlords. There's, I'm going to say, about 100 adjudicators. How can you control what everybody's doing, the decisions that they're making? How do you gauge that? I had a landlord who, on a property that was $16,000 a month for rent, released a key without a deposit. No, it was a residential home.
16 grand. Someone should have had money.
$16,000 a month. Someone should have had money, right?
Yeah.
Nobody had money. Nobody got first and last month's rent. The tenant moved in, didn't pay anything, ever. well, we were lucky enough to get them out, but the landlord lost tens of thousands of dollars.
Right. You imagine 1 month's rent, 16, 2 months, 32,000, right? 3 months.
You're already at the jurisdiction of the
right.
board.
Yeah, you're in, like, it's easy to lose.
Yeah.
Right? So, what could have been avoided? They should have got their first and last.
Yes, that's
And what
a
else
start.
can they get?
First and last.
You can't get anything else other than that?
You could get a key deposit, but I mean,
Right.
whatever.
So legally,
right, legally.
because some people try and get, 12 checks up
Yeah.
front, but
So illegally, the only deposit, with the exception of a key deposit, that a landlord can request is a last month's rent deposit, and only to be applied to the last month's rent. That's it. That's it. If you want to sue for damages or whatever the case is, that is a separate legal proceeding. If the tenant brings a pet and the dog damages the hardwood floors, that's a separate legal proceeding.
well, I had one. I didn't sign the contract as one of my clients that they bought a new townhouse, and then they got tenants in there, and they had 2 black feelings cats that were destroyed the place, and even they were a mess. And then they didn't pay. I know one of the bills they didn't pay, so they owed them about 12,000, 15,000, and they probably had a brand new place. They had another $2,000 or $3,000 repair work, and he says, "No, I'm not doing nothing. You're done," and they're out. But thank God we got them out. We got really nice tenants in there now, but they look after it. But you know what?
Very common.
Yeah.
Very common. Utilities is another thing. Landlords think that tenants will just pay the utilities. Well, as a landlord, you have to provide them with a copy of the bill. How could they pay something that they don't
Well,
know
they're
the
supposed
amount?
to change it into their name,
Yes.
which they did,
Yeah.
but they didn't pay.
Right.
Right?
So sometimes they don't pay, right? But landlords
What can you do
still-
in that case?
You serve a notice, file an application, go through the legal channels.
That's it.
That's it. You have to, anytime you purchase rental properties for the purpose of income, you own a business. You have to operate it like a business. And rental property ownership is the most highly regulated business in all of Ontario. Period.
It's highly regulated?
Highly regulated. Well, the Residential Tenancies Act regulates it, right? There's no other business that's as highly regulated, right? You go to the convenience store and you take a pack of gum and put it in your pocket. That's theft, is it not?
Yes.
But you can stay in somebody's house, not pay $16,000, be given 4 months, right, by the board, and the landlord has to jump through hoops, right? So it's highly regulated. The housing industry is highly regulated. So landlords have to treat it like a business, right? And this is what I hear all the time. I was trying to be a nice guy. I didn't want to raise the rent. Well, too bad, landlord, right? Nobody cares if you were trying to be a nice guy. If you don't exercise your right to increase the rent annually, you lose that privilege.
So guys, this is a very, very, and I tell people this all the time, because, right, was it 3.25 now?
Last year was 2.1.
2.1, okay, whatever. 2.1 is your annual rent increase that you can do. Well, there's 2 parts of that, right? Depending on when the year condo was built.
So if the property...
Let's explain this, because I want
Yeah.
them to understand this. This is important.
Yeah, so if the property was built and occupied prior to November 15, 2018, it's rent controlled, okay? Meaning that the rent can only be increased per the guideline every year.
2.1
And every year it changes.
Yes.
That guideline is set by the ministry, okay? However, if the property was built and occupied after November 15, 2018,
2019. Yeah, but whatever, 219. I'm just calling it even.
Okay, 2018. You can increase the rent. There's no cap. There's no cap. It's not regulated. It's not.
I can increase it by 5%.
You can increase it by whatever you want.
Right.
$1,000, $2,000, $5,000, whatever. There's no cap.
So guys, one is, if you're in a rent control building, you need to make sure you're up in that amount, because if you don't, then another tenant can come in and they only have to go by the last contract. Is that not correct?
No, not here. In Quebec.
Oh.
Remember, a landlord can reset the rent once a tenant has vacated to whatever they want.
Okay.
Okay?
So they don't go by the last.
No.
Because, you know, lots of tenants were in there a long time. They've been in there a long time. They got very cheap rents. So then you'd be stuck at a
Yeah.
very low control.
Yeah, not here. Not yet, at least.
Okay.
Right? May come.
So, but you should always increase it because, trust me, your costs have increased
Yeah.
more than 2.1%.
Remember, if you don't increase, it's a use it or lose it. You can't go back and say, hey, Daryl, for the last 5 years I didn't increase. Can we increase retroactive? And go, you can't do that. Use it or lose it. It might not seem like a lot, but over 5 years, could be a lot.
And I think rents have gone down compared to what they were,
I think so, in some areas.
right?
Yeah.
You know, supply and demand.
Supply and demand.
So, you know, I have tenants and I always looked after them. If there's anything wrong, they call me. I'll get a contractor, go there immediately. I've only had 2 tenants. I've owned it 7 years. And, you know, I charge them less than the average out there, but I get great tenants. So you treat them fairly, you'll get treated fairly back, or you should, right? So, you know, and even now I'm just on month to month because she's old. So I just let, you stay there till you don't want to stay there anymore. That's how I feel, right? They're good.
Well, that's a good way of,
Well,
yeah.
right? It's building relationships. So if you're a landlord, you need to build relationships with your tenant. And then hopefully when you need that favor back, they'll reciprocate, but they don't have to, right?
Right.
They don't have to.
It's more beneficial for the landlord,
Yes.
right? To keep
Yes.
that good relationship.
Yeah. I always have great relationships
Yeah.
with them. So what legal timelines and process should buyers be aware or if a tenant refuses to vacate?
So the buyer should always plan for at least 4 months. 4 months. To go through the landlord and tenant board, at the minimum 4 months. If it's sooner, it's a bonus. But at least 4 months to go through a system.
I thought they were supposed to fix that up somewhat.
They did. Remember it was 8 months?
Yeah.
And then there was 7 months. And now we're at 4 months.
4 months.
Yeah.
So pretty sad when you're the landlord and you sold the property, but you can't close the property because the tenant won't move. And now it could take you 4 months to get there. So you can be, they still have to pay rent while they're there.
Absolutely.
But what if they refuse to pay rent?
Then you have to start a separate legal proceeding for non-payment of rent. Everything at the board is a separate proceeding.
So if I was going in one and they didn't pay rent after that,
Now you have to serve them notice for
I gotta
non-payment.
start all over from scratch.
The non-payment of rent process, yes.
So I had the other one in already 2 months before.
Yeah.
And now they're not paying rent. So I gotta wait 2 months and I gotta then do a new process,
You got it.
right?
Yeah.
Stupid. Right? Like really, you know? And I have tenants, but I have good tenants. So, you know, they remain that way, right? But guys, you listen, if it's your property, you should be listening and making sure you do everything you do for your properties. But if it's your client's property, you need to let them know this information for they can start doing ASAP because time of the essence, and time is a lot of money.
Yeah.
You imagine that guy 16,000.
That's crazy.
So not only on 16,000, there was probably utilities and other things that went along
Well,
with that.
let me tell you.
Let me tell you, let's listen.
So, not only was he owed something crazy like $60,000, $70,000 in rent, we evicted the tenant. The tenant has now filed an application with the board because they want their belongings back. And there's a hearing coming up in a couple of weeks. So if you guys want to attend, shoot me an email and I will provide you with the link. And that is a hearing that you would want to watch.
Well, maybe, yeah.
So not only does the
We watch
tenant
for
owe
class.
money, yeah, not only does the tenant owe the landlord money, the tenant has now filed a claim for $50,000 because they feel that they didn't have access to get their belongings. So here we are.
A double whammy,
Yeah.
right? So, dot your i's and t's. So, what happens on closing day if the tenant's still in the property, and what are the buyer's realistic options at this point? Like, I know we discussed it, but, so, I've closed I went there, because most of the buyers I have, they go in beforehand to see. But let's say they went 2 days before, tenants already packed up their things, are at the door, ready to go, and then they close and the tenant's still there.
Are they on their way out?
They were on their way out, but
And then they
I
said,
guess maybe they didn't get the other place they were supposed to get, because, right? And now they're still there.
guess the buyer's not moving in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So what happened? You gotta start your process
you gotta
right
start your
then?
process. Yeah.
But they had already signed an N11.
If they signed an N11, you can file that N11 with the board, which is probably the the path of least resistance. File it with the board, get your order, and enforce that order.
Yeah, they
But
signed,
again,
they signed the N11. They
Yeah.
definitely signed the N11.
it's still going to take 3 to 6 weeks for the sheriff.
So imagine the tenant was moving out, the buyers went in to look at it 2 days before, even 1 day before. The box says, oh yeah, the moving truck's coming, we're gonna be out of here. And then, I don't know, something happened, who knows what happened, I'm not gonna speculate. But they're decided, okay, we're unpacking again and we're not moving, right? So they already signed an N11, which I tell my guys, get the N11 signed. So their N11 was signed, but now they're not moving out. So the quickest thing that we can do is 4 weeks away. That's quickest.
Yeah.
So
4 to 6.
so the quickest is 4. So,
Just 6.
but she keeps telling me that's 6. Well, they expedited this. So it doesn't seem like expedited too far to me, right? But imagine that. So now you guys are waiting for your commission, but worse is your seller is waiting for their funds. And now they're stuck with this situation, and nobody can move backwards, forwards. So at that time, the buyers could say, we want to make this deal fall apart.
After closing?
Well, the closing was supposed to be, say, April 1st, and
Okay.
they didn't get vacant possession, so the tenant was still there. But maybe they closed and think the tenant was out of there, and then they went to go there and the tenant was there.
Oh boy.
Yeah, right?
Quite the job for the real estate lawyer. Right?
But that happens.
It happens all the time.
You know that the property closes
Yeah.
and the tenant didn't leave. And meanwhile, they think they got vacant possession. So they've already paid their funds. So the seller's like,
Yeah. So can I tell you what?
we want to know, right?
We had a
You
similar.
want to know? Yeah.
Yes. So we had a similar circumstance arise as a result of the tenant not vacating. But on the day of it was on the day of the closing that the buyer got the key. They went and the tenant was loading the truck. We said, just let them load. They're leaving, let them load. And then the tenant's husband came out and said, we have to unload because where we are, the landlord the new lease, the landlord changed their mind. So the buyer had already closed. They became the new landlord as of the closing date. When you close, covenants that run with the land continue when there's a change in title. You now have to go through a legal proceeding. What happened to the buyer? Well, the buyer ended up living out of their vehicle with their wife and their child because they had nowhere to go. It took a few days before the agent was able to secure a short-term rental for them, but it probably took, if I remember correctly, it was an 8-month process to go through to get these guys out.
And they would be going after the other guys because they
And they're
screwed them
going,
up too,
that's right,
right?
right.
So after, and
Yeah, so they're going after the tenants to get them out so they can move in, But they're also going after the seller because the seller agreed to vacant possession and they were not able to perform the agreement of purchase and sale in order to provide vacant possession.
So in a case like that, most the sellers are gonna be in shit, right? You know,
Yes, they're going to be in a lot of
and
lawsuits.
unfortunately, as the agents that represent these sellers, we're in shit. Even though we didn't do anything wrong, because the N11 or N9 was signed. So we did what we were supposed to do. Unfortunately, what most of us probably didn't do is put it to the board right then. And I think that is the biggest thing that we can learn right now.
Yeah.
So anytime we get an N9 or an N11 signed, expedite it right to the board.
Yeah.
I would basically take it there myself, or get a courier company that you get it stamped, that I wouldn't stick it in the mail.
Well, you can file it online. You don't have to go
Well, you
there.
can file it
You can
online?
file it on, it's probably quicker to file
It online. So,
Yeah.
okay, so you don't need to do snail mail,
Yeah.
and you don't have to take it there, so file it online. So everybody write that down.
But they don't do it because they're agents. Agents cannot file.
Oh. So,
Only
but we
the
got
landlord
to get the landlord
or
to
their
do
legal
it. So we need to push the landlord to
file
make
it.
sure they do it, right?
Yeah.
So, if I have, what, 2 tenant properties now, Trace? Right? So, after we're done, probably the next day or two, we're gonna tell them to do this. Like, immediately. Because, let's start something. It might not be anything, but let's start something. Because, be prepared, right? It's hard enough to sell a tenant property. But the easiest way to sell a tenant property is to sell the tenant with the property. If it is. If you got investors and they've been there for a number of years, they're paying their rent, it's a good sample. You got a good tenant and they're paying rent, and that works for me, right? Because that's all you really want as an investor. Someone's gonna pay the bills and they're in good standing. Otherwise, they gotta start from scratch again.
Right.
Right? So that's one route you should always look at. Is it investment property? Is it being sold as investment property or an end user? Because end user and investment properties are 2 different things. So if you can work with those lines, it's a lot easier for you, right? So it can be a very complicated situation. So what are the key risks buyers should elevate before submitting an offer on a tenant home? So these guys are coming in as a buyer agent. So what things should they be elevating before submitting the offer on a tenant home?
So the biggest risk is, can I get vacant possession? Really, can I get vacant? And what is the likelihood of being able to achieve that? Because if I'm able to get it, then I'll get it by the closing date, whatever that date is. If I'm not able to get vacant possession, I need to make arrangements for the next 4 to 6 months to live somewhere until I am able to get vacant possession.
But you had a property to sell, you sold your property, and now you gotta move into there.
Yeah.
So the other guy stayed in the car for X, Y, Z, right? So I had one that I have right now that I guess they got behind on their funds. The sheriff's department came and locked them out. And so they're living in a hotel for over 2 months with the family. All their stuff is inside. I supposed to put it for sale. So, so what happens if a property goes power of sale and then we just had done a transaction, we paid a year in advance, which is illegal, but we paid a year in advance for the property, and now they can't kick them out, right?
No. The tenant is still protected.
Even under power of sale with the bank,
Remember,
whatever.
the power of sale issue has nothing to do with the tenancy. The power of sale issue is because the landlord, the property owner,
Screwed up.
that's right. So if the bank takes over, the bank
Which
is
they do.
Which they do.
I've seen
They're
it.
taking over, they're stepping into the shoes of the landlord.
So they gotta get the tenant out.
Right.
So what is their best thing to get the tenant out?
Well, usually banks have really deep pockets, right?
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying. So they jingle?
So, well, they can go and get rid of possession, or they would have to do what everybody else does and go through the landlord and tenant board.
Or pay cash?
There's no or cash for keys.
No, cash
Yes.
for keys. So the cash for keys, when the market was really hot, got very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, when she said 100,000, I seen cases higher than that, right? On some of these big properties, up to 200,000.
Wow.
Right? No, nowhere to lie, because the market was so hot, and the tenants were saying, "Screw you, that we're not moving."
And they knew. They knew.
Of course. Well, they were
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
it was like a nightmare in both situations
Yeah.
then, because you can sell the property, but are we going to get vacant possession? So then the tenants were, hey, here's payday for me, right? And
Once that for sale sign goes up and then the sold sign goes up, the tenants know you need me to move. They know that I don't have to move, but if you want me to move, here's how much it's going to cost you. I mean, I've had tenants say, you know, have the landlord buy a piece of land so I can be a free man of the land and I can park my trailer there and live there. Like, I have ridiculous requests, right?
so they parked the trailer there, same thing.
That's right.
Build right around the trailer.
Which has happened.
Have you looked at some house, like condo developments?
Yeah.
You'll see a little house standing there sometimes. You know why?
That's the tenant.
The tenant wouldn't move. Truth. Big freaking condo, billions of dollars. Tenant's like,
They
we
built
like
right
it here.
around it.
We're not moving. They figure they can, and they offered them lots of money, but they just figure they're a prisoner. That's why you'll see some of these little houses right by there, right? So in today's market, would you advise buyers to approach tenant properties differently? I mean, knowing what you know now, remember what you didn't know made sense. But now you know things that you know and you should know as a professional realtor. So what would you suggest to every person that, as we're a listing agent, we're taking a brand new client, we may know him or we may not, and so you're a new client, Bita, great, is your house, do you own your house?
Mhm.
Is you living in it? You have it rented?
I have it rented.
You have
Yeah,
it rented,
yeah, okay.
right? How long's it rented?
5 years.
And what are the terms and all that? I would ask
Okay.
for all the terms,
Here's the
all
lease,
the
yeah.
legal things, lease,
Mhm.
right? Anything else that I should be doing at that stage?
I think one of the questions that you should be asking is, how is your relationship with the tenant?
I always ask that.
Oh, great question to ask.
That's one of the first
Great
things I
question.
ask.
And it's really important because if you don't have a great relationship, you better offer cash for keys before listing. If you do have a good relationship, then it's going to make the sale, the purchase and sale process a little easier for everybody, including the tenant. So I would ask, how is your relationship with the tenant? Do they have children? Do they have pets? You're asking this because you want to gauge, are they going to leave? How easy is it for them to leave? Someone with children, are they going to leave in March? Maybe not. Maybe their kids go to the school in the area, right? Someone with pets, how many pets do they have? Well, they have 4 big Rottweilers. Is it going to be easy for them to find somewhere else?
No
Maybe not.
chance. No
There
chance.
you go.
Someone's got 4 Rottweilers and you got a house or condo. First of all, the condo's not going to let them in,
Right.
right? And you as the landlord and someone's got 4 Rottweilers, probably not your ideal tenant that
Yeah.
you want to let in, right?
So you want to ask these questions to gauge the likelihood of the tenant vacating before, during, or after you sell the property.
Cash for life.
Cash for keys.
Them guys are for life, right? But even a cash for keys, they may not even vacate. Then what do you got?
Well, okay.
So here's what I would do. I wouldn't give them the cash till they moved out of the freaking house. Because I seen one they did that, exactly that, I forget what they paid him. I mean, I think $20,000 or $30,000, and then they didn't move out.
So you can give them the cash when they leave. Even if you give them some cash, it's not likely that they won't leave because they're getting something.
Most likely,
Most
but
likely.
but
So let's
guys,
say-
but always remember that but.
But let's say in that very odd circumstance that they don't leave and they file a motion, or they don't want to leave, whatever the case is, they file a motion to stay an eviction. Usually what the board does is they'll hold a hearing about 30 days thereafter, 30 to 60 days thereafter.
Again,
Where the tenant will have to explain why they're changing their mind. Well, one thing about the landlord and tenant board is they don't have jurisdiction to hear settlement matters. So if we've done a cash for keys and I've given you $10,000 and you change your mind, the board has no jurisdiction to decide on what we decided. So what is going to happen is you just bought yourself 30 to 60 days more time. That's all you did, because the board will likely lift the stay and allow for an eviction. And depending on how your cash for keys is drafted, any costs incurred as a result of you not vacating, whether it's legal fees, whether it's the board's cost, whether it's unpaid rent, will be deducted from the balance.
so they can do that,
Well, not likely.
right? So
But it happens.
So here's the thing: I'm the board, and I tell the tenant, you got to get out of there.
Right.
So what happens?
So the board will issue an order saying that if you don't leave by such and such date, the landlord can file for eviction. Right? If the tenant is still there, the landlord can then take that order, file with the enforcement office of the sheriff. The sheriff will give them a date and time for an eviction, usually 3 to 6 weeks thereafter,
So they bought
Right?
themselves another 3 or 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And they're not paying rent,
and they're not paying rent.
right?
But
See
that's
how-
a separate proceeding.
But they're not paying rent.
But they're not paying rent.
So, guys, that's a lot of like confusing things there, right? So we're coming to the 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. So I could go on for hours with you, and you know,
I know.
it's such a great topic, and such a topic that people, it's like sometimes just like to sweep it under the rug. But it's if you're working with, you know, places that are tenanted, and we all work with places that are tenanted, whether we're buyer or the seller, we need to have some idea what we can do and what we can't do, and take proactive action of at least what we can do. You know, for the buyer, you need to really take proactive, and if you're a seller, really take proactive action. So, you know, would I stop doing it? No, but if I don't have to just work with that, you know, it's not like something you want to jump in and take someone, because some people do a lot of rentals. So, you know, you've got to really beware, and that's the problem. So when you pay them that cash, never pay it up front, number one, never, because they still don't have to get out. So I had a builder, you know, my little builder up there, on Cousins, right? So he had rented it to somebody. He lives, I sold his 2 custom houses, and there was another custom house there. So he had another place that, you know, was good enough to live in. But that first person he rented to, he'd been out, and somebody else, and then somebody else. So I don't know how many people it went through. And then they had gangs of people in there with dogs and parties shitting all over. Didn't pay the freaking rent. And he went through so much nightmare. It cost him $50,000. By the time the court got them out of there, because they ended up going with the sheriffs, locking them people out of there finally. But it took, I don't know how long. But he lost $50,000.
They live there now.
But no, then Bob and Sally lent it out to Harry and Mary.
Wow.
How many times can you do that?
Well, you can't do that without the landlord's permission. You
They
can't
did it
do
without
that.
the landlord's
Right.
permission.
So the landlord now has to file an application
He did.
for an unauthorized occupant. He only has 60 days from discovering Bob and Sally
That's
or
probably
Joe
what the
and Mary or
problem
whoever.
was.
Right. If he misses that limitation period, that 60-day period, he has now acquired that garbage, which is probably what happened
That's
here.
what happened.
Right.
because it went to like 4 or 5, just like this,
Yeah.
right? So it was a nightmare. It was
It is
a total
nightmare.
nightmare.
Those applications
Guys.
actually are.
So I rented out to Bob and Mary. They have a 1-year term, but that after that 1 year they stay on for month to month, and then leave. But then they give it to Joe and Alice. So as the landlord, I can go put a dispute in within 60 days only.
Only, yes, you have to file an application, 60-day limitation period to file the application. From the date of discovering,
60 days.
very important.
Guys, I'll tell you what, after what my poor client went through, I felt bad. I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And financially, they caused him a lot of hardship. I mean, he literally had to tear a house down because the tenants did that much damage. And they didn't pay him. Cost him over $50,000 in non-income they got. Because who are you chasing?
Yep.
Who are you going to chase? The first guy? He's already gone 2 years ago.
Right.
Right? So, you know, what's left is pretty hard. The time has come where I must say thanks to everybody for taking their valuable time, and those that are here live and those that are online. I mean, this, seriously, I could go on for hours about this because this is something that intrigues me, and you just can't find enough. And with, you know, Bita's knowledge and the rest of Stonegate's knowledge is just admirable. So I'd like to again thank everybody. Bita, thank you very much for being here. Let's all give Bita a big hand, right? I mean, guys, if you didn't learn a lot from this session, you were asleep. So again, till next time, Sharing the Mindset, this is Daryl King.